And it's interesting because Baldwin talked a great deal with, profound clarity on, as a child, his feeling that he didn't have that much control. Now, our young people do have this sort of sense of control. They have this idea of diversity being the solution. And we know as adults in the working world, diversity and inclusion is always the topic of discussion. But now, I guess the question to the adults in the room, is it sufficient to simply be in these other spaces?
No.
Go ahead.
I just feel like, so let me just say, when I read the material, the first thing that came to me about space was constricting, right? And I felt like I was reading it today, right? And I feel like right now it's a great soundbite of inclusivity right now. And it's become the new diversion to get away from the problem that exists and creating real solutions, right? I think inclusivity has become a great way to get intel at a very inexpensive and free cost. And for people that are oppressed to feel like, whew, we're included now. It's okay.
Sure.
It's just a perpetuation of what's always existed and being seen in another way.
Right.
It's invisible now.
And this will be my last extension on this. That ironically brings me, not Baldwin, but it brings Nkrumah to mind when he would speak about, white power and blackface. And in modern times, in much of my world of computer science landscape, you see the same dynamics taking place now in the digital space, all because of that quick dopamine fix of, I'm included, I'm here, I'm a part of this discussion, so I got this freedom, the kind of freedom that markets give you when it's either Coke or Pepsi. There's no choice at all. But if you condition the people and control their narrative from Jet's age to Stone's age, right on through to ours, well, oftentimes, that will be, you spend your whole life fighting to simply get in some daggone space. And when you're there, then what?
Following what you said, it's interesting. You both know, it's funny because you have to be very protective of what you let in and what you put out. In the sense, this week, I'm a criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney. I deal with a lot of federal cases. Some cases where the government is seeking to put the person to death. Some situations where the government just wants a young assistant to get experience, so that desire to get experience makes a difference of whether a man goes to jail 5 or 15 years. It's as simple as that. And all week I'm looking and I see how everybody is forced to have an opinion or pick a pony in the race of this political process, the presidential race. To me, forgetting what the purpose is of politics from a specific nature for black people here, which is an organizational tool, but that's another discussion. Having to choose and find the dog in the race, whoever that may be. And then this other pop culture thing concerning black people sum up, and we're not talking about sports and entertainment, is the reparations argument. And I find it odd in that sometimes you can seek a space that you think is a safe haven or something that's comforting because it has the visualization that is for you. We're talking about reparations. There's black people talking about it. But for me, I found myself like, whoa, I understand the intellectual, moral compass argument for that. It's a no-brainer. We shouldn't be having that conversation. But it shows me how with power, which is what Baldwin and any other black intellectual person actually living life deal with, is the eruption of brutal power and control, whether suddenly or grotesquely. And the concept that as black people in the middle of being at a point in modernity where this planet may not last as long as we would like it to last, therefore leaving children who are dealing with this at a real different kind of a space, I find it wild that we get sucked into these things so easily, because if the thief who took something from you, if you're living in this world and you think the thief who stole something from you is going to have some sort of moral compass to give it back, or the brutal bully who has his hands around your throat and his foot on your neck is going to just let him light up a little bit, if you just say the right things to him, you know, pimping ain't easy. You know, like, and I feel like we're at this very weird space where we have all of these great writers and people like Baldwin, who what they did was they really gave us a blueprint and a roadmap that the majority of us have become trained and complicit and not following and expanding on that in real life and time through action and critical disruption. So it's just an interesting concept.
I wanted to extend on that to something that you just shared that I thought was so powerful to me, was this idea of, well, when we envision space and we think about safety, right? I think that's a really, really important construct. One of the first things that stuck out to me in the text was Baldwin making this point of him leaving Harlem, right, to go to this white world, and he felt safer there, right, away from his family because of the pressure of, you know, him coming into himself and who he was, and he did not want to minister, you know, anymore. He didn't want to go to college. So I thought that first of all, was really powerful, that statement of saying, I feel safer down here versus even my own family. Because I think I would like to challenge this construct that we are supposed to inherently feel safer with sameness, because it's not true. Yeah, it's absolutely not true. And it's something that's very personal to me, that idea, because I've been an educator for about 18 years, and the majority of my time has been spent in white schools. And I have constantly have dialogue with my colleagues about like why I chose to, you know, be in the spaces that I've been in. And I've always been very, very fervent about the fact that we need space interrupters, right? Like my presence at these schools, especially running a white school and being the only woman of color in the building, the only black person. I ran a white school, I was the only black person in the building. Imagine what that life was like for all those teachers who had to come to the building every single day. You know, I mean, I just think it's really important to recognize that when we still talk about space, right, the safety piece is important, the agency piece is important, the freedom piece is important, right? The freedom to navigate spaces we choose to. And I feel like another trapping is that a lot of times when we do think about and use the term freedom, right? Freedom can be a slippery slope, because sometimes that word could put you in a space of it centering on selfishness. It's about what I want to do, or where I want to go, or where I want to be. But I would really, you know, I'd like to challenge everyone to really think about freedom in terms of personal responsibility, right? Once you're in a space, what are you going to do, right? What's the message are you sending, right? What lessons are you trying to convey?
Just with your body.
Yeah, just your physical presence, which is what, you know, I felt very strongly about in terms of my professional career. So.
Stephanie Heath, and then I'm gonna switch gear a little bit. Go ahead, Stephanie.
I think thinking related to some of what you said, and then also your question about diversity and inclusion. I think for me the missing piece is equity. So we talk a lot about diversity, we talk a lot about inclusion, but without equity, it's just tokenism, right? Because you're not addressing the underlying structures, you're not addressing the systems. You're just saying we have a superficial, you know, some variety. You can offer up your opinion and your thoughts, but at the end of the day, you're not making decisions. There's a small room of people who are pretty homogenous, who are actually deciding what goes down. And when you are one of the few, kind of you're constantly reminded about the work and the labor that you have to do that is unpaid to manage and kind of continue to show up in that space. So I think the older I've gotten, I also have had to be really, really thoughtful and intentional about where I put my energy. I may have the urge to want to change every space, but I don't have the energy. So I also have to pick and choose my battles. So like at work, I'm one of, a few Black people that have some autonomy in a very large institution, and everyone wants you to sit on their working group. But I'm not sitting on everybody's working group. In part because you need to show me that you're serious. I'm serious, but if you're not serious, you don't get my intellect. You don't get my energy. And so there is something about also the freedom to choose when you do and do not engage. And yeah, showing up every day, being the only Black person in a white institution, it takes a lot of energy. And then to try and transform the system within which you are operating, where you are the exceptions, to get to in hopes that there will be a day when you are not the exception, is a whole other, I think, endeavor.
So I just think
Bonsi.
that, I think that I want to extend on the point, and maybe I pose a question to the room. Reading the Baldwin text, I felt that there was some alignment between his experiences and some of mine growing, in the church. And I think that what happens in church sometimes is you get so hedged in your fears that you don't get a chance to really experience your faith. And I say that because Eastern philosophy is really a world where you revolve around the world. Western philosophy is really designed where the world revolves around you. And as we talk about space and self, right? If you've been hedged in Western philosophy, especially evangelical Western philosophy, the Black church, right? It can be really scary to step outside of that Western philosophy and say, no, I revolve around the world. And I say that to say that as he came into these self-discoveries, I felt like I was witnessing Baldwin push back on that idea that he revolved around the world because of all of the hedging that had happened when he was, as he was coming up. And then I see that as our collective issue as oppressed and marginalized people, is that we've been so hedged in Western philosophy. We've been so hedged in the idea that we all need to be individually good, that we've sacrificed the generations that are coming after us, because the world revolves around us. We don't revolve around it.